Welcome to another episode of Ask an Elder. I am here today with Dr. Tawanda Jordan. This is one I'm super excited about as Dr. Jordan is doing really great things in my home state of Maryland, go Maryland. And she is also the first Black woman in chemistry that I've ever met. And my name is Deshea Player. I am a junior at Dickinson and also a chemistry major. I, on campus, am an RA. I am a peer advisor. I'm also on the Dickinson College Student Senate and on some other clubs like women's basketball. Dr. Jordan, who I have the pleasure of speaking with today, currently serves as the seventh president of St. Mary's College of Maryland and is the board chair of HERS, Higher Education Resource Services. Prior to her time at St. Mary's, Dr. Jordan served as a dean and professor of chemistry at Lewis and Clark College. During her time at Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Dr. Jordan started as a senior program officer and then was promoted to director when she established the Science Education Alliance. Prior to Dr. Jordan's time at Howard Hughes, she served in a number of roles at Xavier University of Louisiana, ranging from assistant professor of chemistry to associate vice president of, academic affairs. Dr. Jordan has several publications, serves on a number of boards, and has received dozens of awards and recognitions. To name a few, Women on the Move Award from Associated Black Charities, Trailblazer Award from Morgan State University, Top 25 Women in Higher Education and Beyond by Diverse Issues in Higher Education, and Outstanding Educational Leaders in Maryland by the Afro newspaper. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Dr. Tawanda Jordan.
Hello, Deshea. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for
Uh,
taking the time with me today.
well, I'm really excited for this conversation. So let's start from the beginning. You majored in chemistry at Fisk. I'm a chemistry major. I'll tell you what drew me to chemistry, and I would love to hear why you chose chemistry and about some of the challenges you dealt with, because I imagine that some are similar, but many may be different. So I chose chemistry because I was not really that great at it in, high school. And I was like, this is something I really like. I'm not great at it. I want to continue it. And so when I initially got to Dickinson, I was thinking that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I wanted to be a lawyer that used science. So I was thinking about medical malpractice, and I was thinking about patent law and environmental law. And I had this idea in my head that in order to be a lawyer, I needed to major in something law related, but I quickly learned that that wasn't true and that I could major in whatever I wanted. And so I took an accelerated chemistry class and I did so much better than I did in high school. And I was like, I think chemistry is the most important science. It's, really helpful in explaining the other sciences, and I'm getting better at it. And so this is what I'm going to do with my major, because you can do anything, go to law school, med school, grad school with a chem major. And so that's why I majored in chemistry. But why did you major in chemistry, Dr. Jordan?
My story starts in high school too. How about that?
Yeah.
Um, but before I took chemistry in 11th grade, all of the sciences I took in school before then, I absolutely hated, right? They were the most boring things in the world. And my least favorite science was earth science,
Oh,
right? Um, then I took chemistry in 11th grade, and I'm telling you, the world started to make sense to me,
mhm.
right? And I just got excited about the atoms and thinking about electrons and molecules and this sort of thing, right? And plus, I think it helped that I had a crush on my 11th grade chemistry teacher, right? I love that guy. And he never knew that until I became a college president, right? But I really did like that guy. So anyway, I get to college and I decided when I went to college, I was going to be a biology major. And the reason was because chemistry seemed too hard. And I needed to make sure I can get through college so I can get a job and stuff. So I started as a biology major. I lasted a half a semester. It was the most boring thing in the entire world to me. And so that's when I decided I'm going to be a chemist, right? And that's when the world was just right. The only chemistry I ever took that I just struggled with was physical chemistry.
Oh, me too.
I hate physical chemistry with a deep, burning passion, right? But I struggled through it and I got through it. Somehow I made an A in physical chemistry as an undergraduate. But then when I got to graduate school, I had to take a biophysical chemistry class. And I'm telling you, the entire class was about water. That's all I remember, right? And I was just like, it's three darn atoms. How interesting can this be? Anyway, that's how I got into chemistry. I just thought it was just cool. And as you said, almost every science depends on chemistry. The only science that I know of that you can do without chemistry is physics, right? That's the purest science. But everything else, you can't do it without chemistry. So it's very cool, just like you said.
Yeah, well, I joke with my friends who are biology majors and biochem majors, and I always tell them, they say, oh, there's not a lot of chem majors. And I'm like, but we don't have to take biology classes. You guys have to take chem classes to fulfill your major. It's the most important. Um, so you went to Fisk undergrad. Um, how did that prepare you for your career? And also, could you talk about like specific challenges you had as a woman of color in STEM and a chemistry major furthermore?
Yeah, Fisk, I that was the best choice I ever made in my life when I think about going to college. And I think that most people, when they look back on their undergraduate years, say that that's the best school ever, right? But when I got to Fisk's campus, I felt like I belong and I felt like I was on hallowed ground, right? And so you have this small community of people who looked like you,
Mhm.
but their experiences were much broader than mine because my family was not well off, right? And so I got to see that there were rich Black people and there were Black people who had been to Europe and all this other stuff. And it just opened up my eyes. But Fisk, we were a very tight community
Mhm.
and we helped each other out, but we were also a poor school when it came to chemistry. So, I would do undergraduate research. I started doing it right after my sophomore year, the
Uh-huh.
summer after my sophomore year. And sometimes, I'm an organic chemist. And so, you go and you're supposed to be making these molecules. But even to take a melting point, back in the old days, you used to have to put them in these capillary tubes.
Uh-huh.
We didn't always have money to buy capillary tubes. So we would pull the glass ourselves and make these tubes. And so what Fisk did for me, besides having this group, this community that gave me confidence and understanding that I could succeed, it also taught me how to do without
Mhm.
and how to be creative to get the things that I needed. So that was a tremendous help for me. When I got to graduate school, I mean, I was confident in me, but I went to Purdue. So you go from Fisk, which back then had 1,400, 1,500 students, to Purdue that had well over 30,000 students on that campus. The first day that school was in session, because, I'd been there before one summer,
Mhm.
and it was cool, right? But then I didn't realize that's because most of the students were gone in the summer, and a lot of the people that I saw looked like me were there because they were there in special summer undergraduate research programs. So that first day of class, when I walk out onto the quad, all I saw was a sea of white. And I remember saying, oh my God, what have I done? Right? It was terrifying. And then so when I went to graduate school, I went in biochemistry because biochemistry made biology make sense to me,
Okay.
right?
Right, right.
So I am sitting in these biochemistry classes. I'm the only Black person in those classes. And they would be talking about things that I had no idea because I was a pure chemistry major. And then they're talking about all this biochemical stuff. And that first semester, I felt like there was Tawanda blood on every classroom that I sat in because I just felt like they were throwing me up against the wall, right? And the Students would not share their notes with me. They wouldn't talk to me. The professor sometimes would pass out papers. And I always sat in the front of a classroom. And somehow everybody would get the paper except I did, right? So there's something not right. And so I did not do well that first semester. And I remember driving. So in grad school, you should just know you don't have any money if you want to go to grad school. You have no money, right? And so back then I could rent a car. The one credit card I had was Sears. And you could go to Budget Rent a Car and rent a car if you had a Sears credit card, right? And so I rented a car, drove from Indiana to Virginia to see my maternal grandmother because she was my inspiration for life. And she just had a third grade education. So I barely had money for gas. I couldn't stop for food. So I packed peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and ate peanut butter and jelly and peaches all the way driving from Indiana to my grandmother and just talked to her and says, I can't do it. I said, I'm failing. I cannot do this biochemistry PhD thing. And she sat me down and told me who I am as a person and who our people are as people and the strength of the women. And then she told me to get my butt back in the car and go back to school, but it was exactly what I needed. And from that point forward, I was focused and I did well in my classes, right? Because every time it would get too hard, I would think about my grandmother. I mean, she was a living maid for this Dutch family in Charlottesville, Virginia. They treated her, in my view, like crap. And I'm like, if she can get through that, right, I can get through this. And that's what motivated me. So it was my grandmother and the women in my family who are strong and the Fisk letting me know that I can do. Right. It really got me through stuff. So I think that, and tell me when you want to just ask another question, right? So STEM is hard, right? Even nowadays, especially the physical sciences. Yes. Because if you look in the women in science now, they are the majority, especially in the biological sciences, right? Yeah. But in the physical sciences, we are more than a minority. We're a minority of the minorities, and it is hard as heck. And you can be places giving a talk, and I have been places to give a science talk where I am a keynote, and people would assume that I was like the help or something like that. Or they will always say, you may not know the answer to this, but, and I always know the answer to stuff because you have to be over prepared. And when you go to meetings, you get the people who can ask the hardest questions to practice your talk in front of, so to see if they can stomp you, right? Because you got to be prepared. And I think that we have a tendency, we have to be over prepared. Yep. Because they have no confidence that we know what we're talking about. And we always know what we're talking about because we know the world.
Had a conversation with my closest friend on campus who's a biochem major, and we were talking about how it is to be at a school like Dickinson. It's a predominantly white school, to be the only person in multiple of your classes who's not a Black woman, but also a woman of color, and how I've had experiences where students will come and they can't figure it out. I know the answer, and I tell them the answer, and they're like, yeah, no, I don't think you're right. And they go and ask the professor, and I'm like, well, then why did you ask? She's going to tell you the same thing I told you. I'm just as prepared, if not more prepared than you are. But
that's exactly.
I think it's preparing me for my future, and probably having to deal with similar experiences with life after Dickinson. But I wanted to ask you, was there like a professor at Fisk or at Purdue who you think had like such a huge impact on your career and like who you are today? Someone who like mentored you maybe?
I have lots of mentors, right? So the first Black woman chemist I had was at Fisk. She was incredibly smart, but her see, how do you say this? Her priorities were different than what I thought they should be, right? Because in my brain, you're a chemist. Back then I was immature and I says, your career should be driving everything. But she decided, I mean, so she had a master's degree because she was in a PhD program. She decided she didn't want to do it. So she took the master's, married this guy, and she was happy raising her kids, and she would come to Fisk and she would teach and she would go home and she was content. And in my brain, it's like, you should have gotten a PhD, right? You should have, right? But I think about that professor a lot now because she was right. You can't, you have to be more than this major or this degree or kind of stuff. So she was important to me. And at Purdue, my inspiration was actually a woman who had, who was on my PhD committee. But she was also one who was a mother and a wife, right? And so they were showing me how you can do things outside of the professions and still be successful. And those were very important for me.
That's really powerful to see that you can do all the things. You can have a family, be a parent, and also, kick butt in chem.
Yeah,
Um,
that's exactly right.
so I want to talk more about what you do now, your presidency. What drew you to the presidency? Um, what drew you to Maryland St. Mary's College? Um, yeah, tell me about that.
So I never wanted to be a college president. That's the first thing. And when I was assistant professor at Xavier in New Orleans, the provost, which is vice president for academic affairs, and the president wanted me to do a program for women in higher ed administration. It was actually hers, right? And I says, nope, I'm not interested. I said, I have these twins. I mean, I had twins, right? They were young. I had a husband who's now my husband, so it tells you how that worked, right? And I had a research lab and my teaching. I was content, and so they let me be. And then 2 years later, they came back and says, we want you to go to this darn thing. So I went. It was a month long, I think, or 3 weeks or something like that. And the whole time there, this tells you, they sent you this homework. Back then, we didn't have all these apps and internet the way you guys have, right? They sent these big binders with all this homework I'm supposed to do that I was supposed to turn in when I got to the thing. I didn't do any homework, right? Because I'm like, I'm a non-conformist, so I'm not going to do it. So when I get there and they said, did you have your homework? I says, I didn't do any of it. Doesn't that mean I can go home? They says, no, you have to stay. And the whole time, it was a great program. And at the end, they said, you're going to be a college president. I says, nope, I'm not interested. But then after 2 years, I became interim associate dean of College of Arts and Sciences. Then the president asked me to stay on as associate dean. And then I became associate vice president for academic affairs. And I realized that I could do this administrative thing. And you got to see the university at a different level beyond your classes. And you got to make an impact on students much more broadly could you do, right? So then Katrina happened. I know I'm going to get there soon. Katrina happened. We had to leave, of course. I ended up at Howard Hughes. Best thing ever happened to me. Then I decided I was too far from students. I go to Lewis and Clark, and after 3 years, I was so frustrated. I said, this is not working for me. I think I'm too grown up to be a dean. So I interviewed for presidency with St. Mary's College. And the reason I came, there are a couple of reasons. The reason I was looking in Maryland is because my parents are here and they're getting older. Right? The second thing is it's a public honors college. It's liberal arts. There is no better mission for an institution than to talk about educational excellence akin to the best liberal arts colleges in the nation that is focused on access, affordability, and diversity, right? So the mission was perfect. And then when I was looking at all the stuff they send you when you're applying for presidency, and it says, must believe and embody the St. Mary's way. And I was like, what the heck is that? And I literally said, it could be a cult or something, right? And so I had to look it up. And when I read it, it spoke to me. It is our aspirational ethos. And it really boils down to respect for self, respect for others, respect for the environment in which you find yourself, right?
Right.
And that's our expectation of everyone. And that's why I'm here. And I love my job. I
So
love it.
favorite part of your job and
Uh,
most challenging part of your job.
the most challenging part, well, let's talk about the favorite part first. The favorite part is, there are a couple of favorite parts. First of all, it is about doing what you can to provide students with the best educational experience they possibly can have, right? So everything should be done with the focus on the student.
Right.
And it's the problem solving. That's where being a chemist and a scientist really comes into play, right? It's perfect for that. And you think about it, scientists, when you're successful, you write papers, you get grants. Part of a grant is convincing people of something they can't see, right? It's such to the level that they're going to give you money to do it.
Right.
What's a college president do? They paint a picture of a vision.
Right.
You can see it, others can't, but you can tell it in such a convincing way that they're willing to give you money for it. That's awesome, right? So I like that part. The most challenging part is that people don't like change. And they can, it can be the most frustrating thing in your entire life, right? So as you're trying to move an institution, and people recognize that means change, there's going to be chaos introduced into the system, right? And then people have this emotional response. So you got to get through that. Then they're going to be angry. And then they're going to be sad. And then they move. So you got to be ready for that. That's the most challenging thing. And so I wear Kevlar to work every day, because somebody's going to try to take me out. And then if I know it's going to be an extra special day, I wear Kevlar and Teflon, because you got to be prepared.
You got to be prepared.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, as we're describing that process of change, I was thinking about chemistry. I'm like, oh, that's kind of, changing systems. You change the pressure of the system. You got to, yeah. Next thing I want to talk about is this new project. So you were looking to build a new stadium complex, and you made a discovery. Tell me how you felt about that discovery and what you did, your most recent project.
Right. So I was sad and depressed. And, we probably read in some of these interviews that I had just hoped that St. Mary's College had no hand in slavery. But, if you look at where I am located in the state, right, it's all over the place. So it's very important to find a way by which we can talk about this part of history, but not in a finger pointing kind of way.
Right.
Not a woe is me kind of way, but to celebrate their lives, their persistence and perseverance, the impact it's had today, and what it means for tomorrow, right? So it was definitely a community effort, not just a team effort. And it was important to give those who were enslaved a voice in the history. And the narrative of this place, I don't know if you've ever been to Southern Maryland, but they talk about the colonists. They talk about the plantation owners. And then, there'd be a Black person that did something and they'll raise that Black person up. It's like, there's a whole bunch of people missing here. How do we connect the dots? And so I think that, one of my VPs says, this is your part of your legacy. And when I think about it, they're exactly right. But I didn't do it with that in mind. It was just that if you're going to be able to connect or correct history,
Right.
you gotta give voice to everyone that was present and then interpret it from that perspective. So I'm really thrilled with the result of that project. This little college down here, I think we've made some good strides here to get that narrative changed.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I was looking at your PBS interview yesterday and
Uh,
looking at pictures of it, and I think it's like when I look and I see the words from the ads around the building, and I see that it's slave quarters, and I don't know. I think the Angela Davis quote um, about the slave quarters. That's just such a really great idea. Like it's not really similar to any sort of like dedication or memorial that I've seen that recognizes this such important group of people who came before us and paved the way for us. So it's really inspiring.
well, you should come down when we get to the other side of COVID, and I'll give you a special tour,
Oh,
but
I would love that. I would.
yeah, I would love for you to come down. And even if you go on the website very quickly, you can scan the QR code and it will go to certain parts of the commemorative, the slave quarter, and you can get Quentin Baker reading that poem. It is so powerful. Very, very
He's the author of the poem, right?
yeah, he's the one who took the historical documents and did the erasure poetry on them, and brought out the voices of the slaves in them.
Wow.
Yeah, it made me cry the first time I saw the memorial. And I don't do that often. My grandmother says, never let them see you cry.
Yep.
Yeah.
People say that to me too. Okay. Yep.
Good.
So my last question for today is I'm gonna ask you for a piece of advice for a young woman like me, a young woman of color preparing for life beyond these limestone walls.
Don't let anyone tell you you can't. How about that? Nobody. Because you know what you can do. And you can actually do things that you didn't even imagine you can do. The fact that you've gotten this far says that it's in you. I used to tell my students, don't hang out with turkeys if you want to soar with the eagles, right?
Right,
You
right.
need to remember. This has been a pleasure.
The pleasure's been all mine. I've really, really learned a lot, enjoyed our conversation, and I looked forward to that tour at the end of COVID.
Well, you know how to find me.
Yep, I sure do.
You stay well.
You too.
This message has been brought to you by the National Black Leadership and Empowerment Project.